Most people think food disappears because it was bad. But that is not true. Meals vanish because life moves on. Because families change. Because kitchens change. And because the reasons those meals once mattered are no longer there. In Australia, after the 1980s, something quietly disappeared from everyday life. The meals that once fed working families week after week slowly faded away. They were not banned. They were not illegal. They simply stopped being cooked. These meals were born from hard times. They were shaped by factory shifts, farm work, tight wages, and long days. They were never meant to be fancy. They were meant to fill bellies. Today, we are looking at 20 Australian meals that vanished after the 80s. Some of these meals were loved. Some were hated. And some were eaten only because there was nothing else. Watch till the end of this series because one of these meals once fed almost every Australian household, and today most young Australians have never tasted it. 1. Choco bake. For much of the 20th century, the choco was everywhere in Australian backyards. It grew fast, needed almost no care, and produced more food than families knew what to do with. During hard years, chocos were baked, boiled, mashed, and hidden inside other dishes. Mothers added sugar and lemon to make choco pie. They mixed it with apples so children would not notice. They diced it into stews and casseroles to stretch meals further. The choco was never about taste. It was about survival. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, things began to change. Supermarkets expanded. Imported fruit became cheaper. Families no longer needed to rely on backyard vines to survive. The choco, once a quiet hero, became a reminder of struggle. People who grew up eating it often wanted nothing to do with it later in life. Younger generations never learned how to cook it at all. Slowly, the choco disappeared from the dinner table. Today, many Australians still see choco vines growing on old fences, sheds, and dunnies, but very few bring them inside to cook. What once fed families vanished without ceremony. 2. Bread and dripping. Bread and dripping was once a normal part of daily life. Every roast produced fat, and that fat was never wasted. It was poured into jars, left to cool, and stored for later. By the next morning, it had set into a thick white layer with a darker jelly beneath. Mothers spread it on bread, added a sprinkle of salt, and handed it to children heading off to school. Workers ate it before long shifts. It was heavy, rich, and filling. Most importantly, it was free. This meal disappeared when two things changed. First, health advice began to warn against animal fat. Second, fridges became common in every home. Keeping old fat no longer felt necessary or safe. Butter and margarine replaced dripping. Bread and dripping went from everyday food to something people quietly remembered but rarely admitted to eating. By the late 1980s, it had vanished from most kitchens, taking with it a reminder of how carefully families once lived. 3. Bubble and squeak. Bubble and squeak existed because waste was not an option. After a Sunday roast, leftover cabbage and potatoes were chopped together and fried in a pan. The name came from the sound it made as it cooked. It was never exciting. It was never special. But it was reliable. It meant food was used, not thrown away. As Australian life changed, so did cooking habits. Families stopped cooking large Sunday roasts. Frozen vegetables replaced fresh leftovers. Ready meals arrived. Without leftover cabbage and potato, bubble and squeak had no reason to exist. It quietly disappeared. Younger Australians never learned the name, let alone the recipe. What once represented thrift and care faded away as waste became normal. For mutton roast. For generations, mutton fed Australia. It was strong in flavor, tough in texture, and needed long cooking. Mothers knew how to make it tender. A single leg of mutton could stretch into several meals. Roast on Sunday. Cold slices on Monday. Stew on Tuesday. Soup on Wednesday. Rissoles by the end of the week. Nothing was wasted. By the 1980s, people wanted convenience. They wanted meat that cooked fast and tasted mild. Lamb replaced mutton. Butchers stopped selling it. Younger Australians grew up without knowing the difference between lamb and mutton. Today, most mutton is exported overseas. The roast that once filled kitchens with smell and steam has vanished from everyday Australian life. 5. Lamb's fry and bacon. Lamb's fry, meaning liver, was once promoted as healthy and cheap. Mothers soaked it in milk to soften the taste, fried it with bacon, and served it with gravy. Some loved it. Many hated it. Children often dreaded the smell before they even saw the plate. As diets changed and supplements replaced offal, lamb's fry became unpopular. The idea of eating liver began to feel old-fashioned and unpleasant. By the 1990s, most families had stopped cooking it. Today, lamb's fry survives mainly in memory and jokes, not on dinner plates. 6. Crumbed lamb's brains. Crumbed lamb's brains were once considered a treat. They were soaked, crumbed, fried, and served on toast with white sauce. Children often ate them without knowing what they were. Mothers did not always tell. As food safety rules tightened and attitudes changed, brains disappeared quickly. People became uncomfortable with the idea of eating them. What was once normal became shocking. Today, many Australians react with disbelief when they hear that brains were once common food. The meal vanished almost completely by the late 1980s. 7. Tripe and onions. Tripe required time, patience, and acceptance. It was slow-cooked with onions until tender and served with white sauce. Grandparents loved it. Children often refused it. As families grew busier and quick meals became normal, tripe disappeared. Few people were willing to cook something no one else wanted to eat. Today, tripe is rarely seen outside specialty shops. It survives mostly in stories about grandparents and cold winter nights. A meal that once symbolized comfort and thrift faded quietly away. 8. Corned beef with white sauce. For much of the 20th century, corned beef was one of the most common meals in Australia. A large slab of beef was cured in salty brine with cloves and spices, then boiled for hours until soft. The smell filled the house. The meat was sliced thick and served with mashed potato, boiled cabbage, and carrots. But the real star for many families was the white sauce. Made from flour, butter, and milk, it was poured generously over everything on the plate. Corned beef was popular because it was cheap, filling, and easy to stretch. Leftovers became sandwiches the next day or were fried up for breakfast. By the 1980s, boiling meat for hours began to feel old-fashioned. Families cooked smaller meals. Supermarkets offered sliced meats and faster options. White sauce fell out of favor as taste changed. Slowly, corned beef disappeared from weekly dinners. Today, many Australians remember it clearly but rarely cook it. 9. Spam fritters. Spam entered Australian kitchens during the war, when fresh meat was hard to find. It came in tins, lasted forever, and could be cooked in many ways. Sliced thick, dipped in batter, and fried until golden, spam fritters became a popular meal and takeaway treat. Children loved them. Parents relied on them. As life improved and fridges became common, spam lost its importance. Fresh meat became affordable again. By the 1980s, spam was no longer a normal dinner item. It became something people joked about rather than depended on. Today, it still exists on supermarket shelves, but it no longer carries the meaning it once did. A food of survival turned into a novelty. 10. Rabbit stew. Rabbit stew fed many Australian families during hard times. Rabbits were trapped or shot, skinned in the backyard, and cooked slowly with vegetables. The meat was lean and strong, but it filled bellies. During the Depression, rabbit kept families alive when nothing else could. By the 1960s and 1970s, rabbit populations declined, and supermarkets offered easier meats. Emotional feelings also played a role. Children raised with cartoons and pets did not want to eat rabbit. By the 1980s, rabbit stew had almost vanished from everyday cooking. It remained only in stories told by older generations who remembered when it meant survival. 11. Devon as a dinner meal. Devon is often remembered as lunchbox food, but for many families, it was also dinner. Thick slices were fried and served with mashed potato and peas. It was cheap, quick, and filling. In homes where money was tight, Devon was a regular evening meal. As nutrition advice changed and processed meat became less popular, parents stopped serving Devon for dinner. It stayed in sandwiches but left the main meal table. Younger Australians grew up thinking of it only as school food, unaware it once fed families at night. 12. Savoury mince. Savoury mince was one of the most flexible meals ever cooked in Australian homes. Minced beef was browned with onion, flavoured with sauce or curry powder, and stretched with vegetables. It was served on toast, rice, or mashed potato. Every mother had her own version. This meal vanished not because it was bad, but because it was plain. As pasta sauces, ready meals, and takeaway became common, savoury mince felt boring. Younger generations never learned how to make it. Slowly, it disappeared from weekly meal plans, remembered only by those who grew up with it. 3. Boiled cabbage with white sauce. Cabbage was once a staple vegetable. It was cheap, filling, and available year-round. In many homes, it was boiled until soft and served with white sauce. The smell filled the house and stayed for hours. Children pushed it around their plates, waiting for dessert. As cooking styles changed, people wanted vegetables with color and crunch. Boiled cabbage became associated with old houses and school dinners. By the 1980s, it had largely disappeared, replaced by stir-fried or roasted vegetables. White sauce followed it out of everyday cooking. 14. Sago pudding. Sago pudding was once a common dessert in Australian homes. Small white pearls were cooked slowly in milk until they turned clear. Sugar and jam were added, and it was served warm. It was filling and cheap. Children often called it frog spawn. As better desserts became available, sago lost its place. Ice cream, cakes, and instant sweets replaced it. By the late 1980s, most families had stopped making sago pudding. Many people remember the name but struggle to recall the taste. It vanished quietly, along with the kitchens that relied on it. 15. Junket. Junket was one of those desserts that felt almost magical when it worked and deeply disappointing when it did not. Milk was warmed, rennet was added, and the liquid slowly set into a soft, trembling dessert. It was usually topped with nutmeg or tinned fruit. Junket appeared often in post-war kitchens because it was cheap and filling, and milk was always available. But junket required patience and confidence. If the milk was too hot, it failed. If it cooled too fast, it failed. As powdered desserts, instant puddings, and store-bought sweets became common, junket felt like too much effort. Mothers stopped making it and children never learned how. By the late 1980s, junket had almost completely vanished from everyday Australian homes, surviving only in memories of grandparents and country kitchens. 16. Tinned fruit and custard. There was a time when tinned fruit was considered a luxury. Peaches, pears, and fruit cocktail packed in syrup were saved for special nights. Poured into a bowl and drowned in hot custard made from powder, it was dessert, celebration, and comfort all at once. It appeared on Christmas tables and on ordinary weeknights when there was nothing else sweet in the house. This dessert vanished not because it was disliked, but because it lost its meaning. Fresh fruit became available all year round. Ice cream and cakes became cheap. Custard from powder began to feel old-fashioned. What was once special became ordinary, and then unnecessary. By the end of the 1980s, tinned fruit and custard slipped quietly out of everyday life. 17. Steak and kidney pudding. Steak and kidney pudding was not a quick meal. It was a commitment. Chunks of beef and lamb kidneys were wrapped in suet pastry and steamed for hours. The kitchen filled with steam. Windows fogged. The smell told everyone dinner was coming. Cutting into the pudding and watching dark gravy spill out was the reward. This meal disappeared as time became precious and offal became expensive. Fewer people were willing to cook for hours. Kidneys became hard to find. Younger cooks had no interest in handling them. By the 1990s, steak and kidney pudding had almost vanished from Australian kitchens, remembered as something grandparents made on cold days long ago. 18. Rissoles made from leftovers. Rissoles still exist today, but the original version has mostly disappeared. Once, rissoles were made from leftovers. Bits of meat from earlier meals were minced or chopped, mixed with breadcrumbs, onion, and egg, and shaped into patties. They were fried and served with mash and peas. Tomato sauce covered everything. Modern rissoles are made from fresh mince bought specifically for the meal. The waste-nothing version vanished when leftovers stopped being the base of cooking. The mindset that created those rissoles faded away. What remains is the shape and name, not the reason they existed. 19. Curried sausages. Curried sausages were never meant to be authentic. They were meant to be filling. Sausages were cooked with onions, curry powder, and fruit chutney. Sometimes sultanas were added. The sauce was thick and sweet. Served with rice or mash, it fed families cheaply and reliably. By the late 1980s, curried sausages became unfashionable. They were seen as old-fashioned and embarrassing. Families stopped serving them to guests. Children grew up without them. Only recently, as grocery prices rise again, have curried sausages begun to quietly return to some tables, reminding people why they existed in the first place. 20. Apricot chicken. Apricot chicken was once the height of modern cooking. Chicken pieces baked with onion soup mix and apricot nectar felt new and exciting. It appeared in magazines, cookbooks, and dinner parties. Children loved its sweetness. Mothers loved how easy it was. Then taste changed. Apricot chicken became a joke. It was labeled daggy and outdated. By the 1990s, it vanished from regular cooking. Like many meals on this list, it is now slowly returning, not because it is trendy, but because it is affordable, easy, and comforting. And that is the truth about these 20 Australian meals that vanished after the 80s. They were not designed to impress anyone. They were designed to keep families fed. They were cooked by parents who worked long hours and made do with what they had. Some of these meals bring warmth and comfort. Others bring memories people would rather forget. But all of them tell the story of how Australians once lived. Which of these meals do you remember most clearly? Which one disappeared from your home first? Maybe it was junket at your grandmother's table. Maybe it was curried sausages on a cold night. Maybe it was the smell of a steak and kidney pudding steaming away in the kitchen. Share your memories in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey through Australia's forgotten food, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.